Now, chat, we're gonna do something we have never done before. We're gonna have a non-engine tier list. Finally, we are not doing separate hand trap and board breaker tier list anymore. And also we get to include some cards that are neither hand traps or board breakers. And I can still give you my opinion on it and it's still fitting. So we're just gonna do a whole ass non-engine tier list for the current TCG format. The one thing I want to point out here is that this obviously heavily depends on the format. So if you haven't yet, I encourage you to check out my overall meta tier list for the current format, where I talk a lot about the current meta developments of like, hey, is this a hand trap format? Is this a board breaker format? What is overall better positioned? Right off the bat, we're going to talk about this a lot doing this, but not every deck in the format right now is weak to hand traps, and not every deck in the format right now is weak to board breakers. Now, overall, though, it seems to be like we're more in a hand trap format than a board breaker format, and that is going to influence my decision here. Let's move in because we have a bunch of things to talk about. Harpy's Feather Duster goes into the B tier because it's not main deckable in my opinion. It's a fine side deck card, but it suffers from another card that we're going to talk about in a bit, and that is Thrust. Thrust is kind of negative stonks right now. It's going down because hand trap format, you know, Thrust isn't great right now, and that was one of the main reasons to play Duster. It made Duster a lot more accessible. Now I think it's still valid to play the card in your side deck, but I don't think you're going to main deck it, especially not if you're not main decking Thrust anymore. Called by the Grave, together with Crossout, because people are playing a lot of hand traps right now, Called by the Grave and Crossout are pretty much as good as it gets for these kind of cards. Like, you will probably not find a better situation to play Called by and Crossout than specifically right now. The issue that I have is that a lot of decks, they're very tight on non-engine slots. And Called by or Crossout, they are not a hand trap and they are not a board breaker on their own. It's kind of hard to fit them in a deck, because do you really want to have Crossout over a hand trap? Do you really want to have Crossout over more engine or like stopping your opponent from playing? It's tough to fit these cards into a deck. If your deck can, though, I think they are good. That's why I'm putting in the middle of the pack. I think there are some decks that want to play these. If you play a lot of hand traps yourself, you're going to find yourself getting good use out of Crossout, I think. And I think Called by is probably better than Crossout because you don't need to have 15 hand traps in your deck to play Called by. You can just play it if you have one slot. That's fine. Retaliating Sea is interesting, I think, against certain decks. The problem with Retaliating Sea is that it's relatively specific. It's not going to hit that many decks. In a format that is relatively wide, I don't think it's good to play a card that is as specific as Retaliating Sea, but it's not bad. I'm putting it in C tier. It's a playable card. Like, I think it's decent against Pearly. It's fine against Rescue Ace, I guess, if they start with Emergency or Diabellstar. Like, it's got uses. Maybe it's B tier for that. Yeah, it's fine against Branded. Even if it hits a couple decks, it's relatively niche. Xyz Encore is another relatively niche card, and I personally don't love niche cards in a format that is relatively wide. Now, it is one of the best cards against Pearly, though. However, I think this card is good specifically if your deck cares about Abyss Dweller, pretty much. Because then, if you're playing a deck that cares about Abyss Dweller, the card suddenly isn't only good against Pearly, it's also good against every deck that summons Abyss Dweller. So if you're playing a deck that suffers from Dweller, this card might be A or S tier, honestly. I think overall, it's a B tier card, very high up in B. Let me preface that. You cannot just ignore Pearly. That is not something you can do. You cannot just say, hey, Xyz Encore is too niche for me. I'm not going to play any outs to Noir. I think it's more realistic that you're going to end up playing a different out to Noir that is good in more matchups. Talents, Thrust, and Herald of the Abyss package in my side deck is going to be good against Pearly, but it's also going to be good against other stuff, right? Contact C, I think, is probably terrible because now everyone and their mom has an out to it with SP Little Knight, right? Herald of the Abyss, I like this card. Talk about Thrust real quick. Thrust is a card that in previous iterations was always an S tier card. Before Age of Overlord, Thrust was always the top of my non-engine tier lists, right? Thrust was phenomenal. And everyone was like, you need Thrust to even compete in the game. And if you don't have Thrust, you're at a disadvantage. And that was true. I think that situation has changed. Now, the card that are required to compete in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Little Knight. Thrust is still a good card. The main trend you're going to see from Thrust is it's going to move from the main deck to the side deck. I think something like side decking Thrust with Herald of the Abyss is a good approach. I think Thrust still has great uses in the format. It's still great against Unchained. You can still play great one-off targets. Those kind of flexibility things are why Thrust is going to be a phenomenal card still. I'm talking myself into putting it still A tier. It's so good of a card. Ash Blossom is S tier in my opinion. There's a good reason why everyone is main decking this card next to Imp Imperm, this card is the best hand trap in the game. The one card that it does something against every single deck in the game, pretty much. There are formats where Ash is not the best hand trap in the format. There's formats where you don't need to play Ash at all. Right now, I think if you're not main decking Ash, you're probably making a mistake. Bell, on the other hand, I am struggling to see great uses for. Good against Labyrinth. That is about it. It's better than Contact Sea, but I don't think it's great right now. Book of Lunar Eclipse is bad. Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse are somewhat mediocre right now because they are somewhat hit or miss. They can dodge Veiler and Imperm, which are very common cards right now. For example, in Flu, I would recommend playing one or both of these books because you can play through Ash and Imperm. I keep saying Ash, Imperm and Veiler with them, but they are also okay non-engine sometimes. You can also play them in decks that have a specific problem with, for example, Caesar. If your deck is fine against Unchained, but you struggle against Caesar, you might want to play books. So I think books are like solid B tier. I think Book of Moon is a little bit better than Book of Eclipse right now, even though against Pearly, Book of Eclipse is better than Book of Moon. Maybe they go next to each other, maybe even a little bit lower than that. They're like fine. They're fine. Bystials in general, I think, are A tier cards right now. More likely to be good in the side deck than in the main deck. That's what I want to preface here. I don't think you should be main decking Bystials in a lot of decks. If you have a good reason to main deck Bystials, then sure, like the Bystial Horus deck as well. There's decks, yeah. In general, though, they are solid side deck options against Unchained, against tier. Not every deck wants to play them. That's why they're not S tier, but they are solid. Change of Heart is a C tier card right now. I love Change of Heart. I like whenever it's really good, but I think the only reason to play the card would be together with Thrust, and even then, you are only gonna search Change of Heart with Thrust if you already have talent in your hand. Cherries, it's very situational and requires a lot of extra deck space. Vanquish Soul is the best Cherries deck. In Vanquish Soul, I could see having the space for it. In Flu, basically all the decks that could play Ultimate Slayer could also play Cherries if they wanted to, and then it wouldn't be bad, but it's definitely not great. Diddy Crow, it looks very generic, but I'm gonna throw it in C tier because I think Diddy Crow just doesn't hit enough decks hard enough. On paper, it seems fine against tier, it seems fine against Unchained, it seems fine against Pearly. Even though you can crow something in every matchup probably, you have to be very lucky for it to be enough. That's the difference between the Bystials. When the Bystials hit, they are huge because in a grind game back and forth, when you hand trap each other, those free bodies, those free +1s off of Magnamood and Druid's Worm, they really matter. Crow doesn't do that. It's just gone and you hope that it was impactful enough. The reason I'm still putting it at like the top of C tier, if you already play a lot of hand traps and you desperately need more, Crow could be the one. Dark Hole is not great right now. A lot of decks that don't care about Dark Hole at all. The only deck that I can think of is Mikanko. That's like the one thing I could think of, but that's very, very niche. Raigeki, on the other hand, is I think even worse than Dark Hole. Droll and Lockbird is a super popular card right now. I'm gonna put it at the top of A tier though. I'm not gonna put Droll and Lockbird in S tier, and let me explain. Droll, I think, is really good against the decks where it completely stops them, right? It's insane against decks like Manadium, Rika, and some other decks in the format. I don't think it's great against decks where if you Droll them, you still need more hand traps on top to stop them from doing anything. Especially there, it can have some sequencing issues because your opponent starts with something that searches and you're like, well, do I Imperm this now or do I let them search and then Droll them? Sometimes it's awkward. You get what I'm saying? I think the card is still good though. If you're not main decking Droll, you're probably gonna always side deck it. That's why it's still the very top of A tier, because even though sometimes it feels awkward, everyone is still gonna play it. Main deck, it feels a little gambly, but it can pay off. Side deck, I think it's always gonna be there. If you're not main decking it, you're gonna side it because it hits a lot of decks really hard. So I like Droll. I think it's very strong. Droplet is somewhat funny because everyone thought when Arise Heart was banned that it was the only thing gatekeeping Droplet pretty much. I'm gonna put Droplet in C tier. The problem that I have with Droplet is that because we're in a hand trap format, I think Droplet just isn't great right now. And especially after I'm using 1 or 2 hand traps, I start my turn with 4 cards. What do I Droplet away, right? It's really hard. If I don't stop my opponent from playing, if they make the full board in any of the meta decks right now, Droplet is not going to do shit. I'm not beating a full combo with Droplet. It doesn't do that anymore. Those things combined, I think, just make Droplet not ideal right now. Enemy Controller, on the other hand, is pretty cool. Once again, the problem with it is alone, it does not really do enough. But the coolest thing about Enemy Controller, in my opinion, is that going second, it helps you dodge imperms and veilers, which Droplet can technically also do. But I think what you get out of Enemy Controller is better than what you get out of Droplet, because you actually take their monster instead of just negating it. Probably too high up here. It's probably more like here. Evenly is a card that is awkward because alone, it does nothing. Also, SP Little Knight is another big deal in this format that makes Evenly almost irrelevant, because your opponent is just gonna use SP, banish itself and one other card, and have follow-up next turn. So I think Evenly is also a C tier card right now, which is crazy, honestly. The fact that I'm putting cards like Evenly and Droplet into the C tier just means how specific of a format we have, how much the game has changed from like last year. I am delighted to say that Phantasme is a playable card again. I'm putting it here. I have high hopes in Phantasme. I still don't think you're gonna main deck Phantasme. I don't think Link Summoning is popular enough. There's too many decks that don't do it that much. But Phantasme is great. Phantasme gives you a body. Phantasme draws you into more hand traps. Phantasme solves one problem that I mentioned earlier, which is that there are some good hand traps, but there are not infinite good hand traps, right? If I go ahead and I say, I want to play 12 hand traps in my main deck and I want to side even more, there's a cliff where you just don't find any more really good hand traps. Like, they don't make them like Ashe anymore, you know? Like, at a certain point, they don't make them like Imperm. They don't make them like Veiler. So if you want more hand traps, but you can't find any more hand traps, Phantasme might be a good solution, because you can draw into those good hand traps. It's good against Little Knight, which every deck is playing. The only question is, do you want to play it over other non-engine? Because itself does not stop your opponent from playing. You have to rely on Phantasme drawing you non-engine pretty much. And also, it conflicts with another card that is randomly the next one on the list, and that's Fenrir. And that is a big deal, because Fenrir is also a very powerful non-engine card this format. I'm throwing it in the A tier, because Fenrir is a monster and a powerhouse in grindy games. When you grind back and forth with your opponent, because both players are playing hand traps, both players are playing grindy decks like Unchained, like Pearly, like whatever, all those decks can grind. Fenrir is really strong. It might almost be an S tier card, and that's why I think the decks that can play Fenrir without it conflicting with their own engine, they should probably play Fenrir. Gamma is obviously limited. That's why I think it can never be higher than C tier, but I want to say that you could probably find better hand traps, but I think there's a world where if you just want to overload on hand traps, you could play Gamma, Delta, and Driver, and then suddenly the one Gamma, one Driver deal doesn't look as bad, because you get Deltas on top of it. Lava Golem is in a weird spot, because like I said, most decks want to play hand traps, and also most decks right now kind of want their normal summon. I still think Lava Golem is a B tier card in something that doesn't need its normal summon. Like Pearly, you could definitely consider playing the card, because there are a lot of decks right now that even if you hand trap them once, they can still end on something, and then Lava Golem can just fuck them up. If you pair it with one hand trap, it's probably good. So decks that can side deck Lava Golem, they can. Chaos Hunter is bad. Imperm is S tier, maybe even, no, I don't think it's better than Ashe right now, but it's very, very close, because there's a couple cool things that Imperm does. It cannot be Talanced, which Talents is also going to be a good card this format. It can't be Called by the Grave, which is also another card that's popular this format. The problem with Imperm is that it conflicts with some cards, like if you draw it in your opponent's standby phase with, for example, Sleepy Memory, can't use it. If you draw it off of Phantasme, can't use it. The one thing that I love about Imperm is that it's good as a 6th card. When I top deck Imperm, I can immediately use it. That I think is very, very important, because if you play a lot of hand traps, your card number 6 is very often going to be frustrating, right? And Imperm not contributing to that is huge. And I think most decks right now, if you want to play hand traps, you always start Ashe Imperm. Always. Kaijus are somewhere in the B tier as well. They have less impact than Lava Golem, but they are more splashable. I think a lot of decks are going to use them as like a small world target, maybe. Similarly to Lava Golem, if you hand trap your opponent once or twice, I think a Kaiju is realistic to still do some solid work. Like if your opponent still manages to end on Caesar, it outs the Caesar. If your opponent still manages to sit on a Little Knight, it can out the Little Knight. You can out the Noir. It's a very flexible card, and I think 1-for-1 trading is not bad in the current current format. Like, if you really think about it, a lot of the hand traps also just try to 1-for-1 trade, simplify the game, you know, and like getting rid of one of your opponent's end board pieces with a kaiju is not bad. Sphere Mode, on the other hand, I think is a C tier card because a lot of the decks don't even have 3 monsters on the end board. Maybe it's a little bit better than these other ones because for the right matchup, it can be good. Like, for example, I think Infernoble or Mannadium are 2 decks that are more likely to play into it. Of course, your deck needs to not need its normal summon though, which is tough. Kurikara, on the other hand, I simply don't like as much. I think Kurikara very often ends up being a less flexible version of a kaiju because simply you have to wait for your opponent to use their effects. So you can't out a Little Knight with it. You can't out a lot of the things that get value off of their effects. So I don't love Kurikara right now. Artifact Lancia is, on purpose, I'm putting it next to Retaliating Sea because it has some uses. Very, very matchup specific, which is not great in a diverse format. So I think it's a low B tier card. But Lightning Storm, I'm going to put even lower than Feather Duster. It's kind of tough because I understand that people still want this card in their deck. It feels so good to Lightning Storm like a Labyrinth or sometimes a Rescue Ace. But the problem is, once again, the same as with Feather Duster and Evenly. If your Labyrinth opponent sets up, they usually have a negate for this card. So you have to pair it up with something else. The context is important. If you play a deck that can easily bait those negates, then you can consider still playing Lightning Storm or Evenly. Mind Control is just a strictly worse Change of Heart. Mourner, I think, is somewhere in the A tier. Together with Effect Veiler, both of these cards are pretty strong right now. Maybe Veiler is even S tier because it's simply when you make the decision to put hand traps into your deck right now, I think it's not enough to just say like, okay, I'm going to play Ash Imperm because those are the best ones and that's it, right? I'm just going to call it a day with 6 hand traps because really, if you want to consistently stop Rescue Ace, you need multiple hand traps because they have so many extenders to play through one hand trap. So if you want to feel safe going second against most of the meta decks, you need multiple. That's where Veiler, Mourner really come in. On its own, they're not amazing, but if you can pair them up with another hand trap, they're really, really strong. And the same is true for Nibiru. I'm putting Nibiru at the top of A. It also needs to be paired, but if it is paired, it's really, really strong. Some matchups even lose to Nibiru if it's not paired. Some matchups lose to one Nibiru alone. I think Nibiru is never going to be your first hand trap in a deck. I don't like that. But I think if you already play Ash Imperm, you can consider Veilers, you can consider Mourners, or you can go a more blowout direction with Nibiru or Droll. These are basically the 6 best hand traps in the format, I think. You have the one-on-one negations, the Ash Imperm Veiler Mourner route, or you have the more blowout perspective of Nibiru and Droll. And then, of course, you have Shifter, which if your deck can play it, it's an S tier hand trap. Not every deck can play it. That's why I'm not putting it at the top. Let's finish off the hand traps real quick. Skullmeister, I don't see a reason to play. It's too generic. It'd be good against tier, but I don't think it's good enough overall. Ghost Ogre. Ghost Ogre is like one of those cards that people have been trying to play because they want to respect Centurion. I personally don't think Centurion is popular enough to respect it with a card like Ghost Ogre. It has some uses in other matchups. It's actually really good against Pearlion, my friend. Like, that's one of the best feelings you can have. Unless they have Happy Memory, then you're crying. Ghost Ogre pretty much destroys Little Knight unless it's being made with IP Masquerena, but then you could have just Ghost Ogre'd the IP Masquerena. So I think Ghost Ogre is one of those cards that it looks worse than it actually is. I think Ghost Ogre is like not better than the hand traps I put into the S and A tier, but it's actually got some surprising coverage. Then we have Pankratops, which I think is between upper B tier and maybe even lower A tier. The only problem with Pankratops is that it's limited. You're never going to main deck this, but it's a solid side deck card because simply runs over Little Knight, outs every floodgate in the game, is pretty much good in every matchup, is also really good if you go hand traps back and forth, you know, similar to Fenrir. It's just a very impactful card because it's big, it runs over things, it often trades 2 for 1, but it's just a one-off side deck card pretty much. That's why I'm putting it lower than Fenrir. Then we have Super Poly, which is a card that I'm seeing people play a lot, but I don't think it's that good. I'm gonna throw it in B tier. Maybe I'm underestimating it because I don't really see all the uses for it, but I don't think it's that good. I don't think it's A tier or S tier. I personally am currently not planning to use this card, but I'm seeing a lot of people use it, so maybe there's more to it than I'm seeing, but I don't love Super Poly. Dark Ruler is somewhere around the level of Evenly and Droplet. Unfortunately, it's just not the format for these kind of blowouts. I don't think we have to go over it. It's the exact same reasoning as for these other cards usually. I think it's better than Droplet because it doesn't require you to send a lot of cards to the graveyard, but I don't love it. Ultimate Slayer, I'm going to put at the top of C. It simply is very situational and cannot be used in every deck, but if your deck can use it, I think it's fine, especially because it's pretty good against SP Little Knight. I like the card, and I think it's not bad this format, but I don't know exactly which decks can really make good use of it because of the extra deck requirements that it has. Then we have Talents, which is straight up an S tier card right now because as you'll notice, outside of Imperm and Thrust, every non-engine that people are playing is hand traps. And I mean, I don't have to tell you that Talents is great in a hand trap format. The only thing that is holding back Talents is the fact that not every deck has infinite non-engine slots. Like for example, if your deck has like 9 or 12 non-engine slots, which is like about average for modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, Talents could make the cut, but it could also not make the cut because if you have 9 non-engine slots and you play Ash Imperm, you're like, okay, 6 hand traps is kind of low. Do I really want to go Talents as my next non-engine? Because I might not draw my hand traps and just get full comboed on. And if you get full comboed on in this format, Talents doesn't do it. Talents is a card that really accelerates at going first. In this format, it's really good at punishing hand traps from your opponent, but I think it's only really good in decks that have more non-engine slots than like 9 or 12. So I don't think every deck is going to play it in the main deck, but you're probably going to side deck it. It still is an S tier card. If your deck has room for it, like if your deck can play enough non-engine plus Talents, you should do it. Cosmic Cyclone is the last one on the list, and I think Cosmic Cyclone is all right. It's got uses in a lot of matchups. It's a fine card. The question is, does it make the cut when you look at all these other impactful non-engine cards, right? Spellbound, I did forget to include. Spellbound is probably also a B tier card because it's relatively situational, but it's playable. I like it. It's like upper B tier. That being said, if there's another card that I may have missed, make sure to let me know in the YouTube comments down below. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and say goodbye to YouTube, Twitch chat, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Peace.